Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sarah lived alone in her small cabin on the ranch, a good walk from the stables. Living by herself made her watchful. So when she saw headlights coming down the long dirt road, she felt a prickle of unease. The lights stopped moving. Sarah slipped inside, her heart thumping, and grabbed her dad's powerful telescope. Keeping the cabin dark, she peered through it, trying to figure out who was out there. The vehicle was far off, over a mile, and the snow was starting to fall harder. Through the scope, she saw two shadowy figures get out of the trees, then quickly get back into the car. As she watched, the headlights swung around, and the car headed towards the main highway. A knot of worry tightened in Sarah's stomach. What had they left behind in the trees? The vehicle looked like a big SUV or a small van, but the distance and the worsening snow made it hard to tell for sure. She stood by the window as the headlights disappeared. The snow was coming down thick now, and she knew it would pile up by morning. Anger started to bubble inside her. The thought of someone dumping trash on her land made her blood boil. Determined to find out who it was, she grabbed her coat and boots and headed to the stable to saddle her horse. She wanted to reach the spot before the snow covered any sign. Meanwhile, a man blinked back to a hazy awareness. One of his eyes was swollen shut, and his whole body screamed with pain, like every bone was broken. Blood dripped into his good eye, making him blink hard to see. He tried to move but couldn't. Confused and dizzy, he didn't really understand how bad he was hurt. He felt the biting cold of the trees and thought he should get home. But who had done this to him? Would anyone at home even know to look for him? He drifted in and out of consciousness, a terrifying blankness where his memories should have been. He couldn't remember where he lived, or even if he had a home. The wet, sticky feeling on his side was blood from a bullet wound, and his skin was raw with cuts. The cold was stealing what little warmth he had left. A coyote, drawn by the scent of blood, started moving in from the distance. It was a hunter sensing easy prey. Sarah urged her horse down the road towards where she'd seen the car. Her dad's old revolver was tucked into her sheepskin jacket, and she grabbed a thick blanket to wrap up whatever trash they dumped. The sheer disrespect of people dumping garbage on someone else's property fueled her anger. The horse picked its way carefully on the snowy road. Sarah didn't push him hard. She didn't want him to slip and get hurt. As she got closer to where she'd last seen the car, she scanned the roadside for trash. She could just make out the tracks of the car's tires, but she knew they'd be gone soon under the falling snow. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a small movement. She squinted into the shadows under the trees and saw the coyote, watching her. Her senses sharpened instantly. A coyote wouldn't get this close unless it was after injured game or tracking something. She quickly told herself she wasn't the target. Coyotes rarely bothered humans, especially one on horseback. Still, Sarah pulled her revolver and fired a shot into the underbrush, a foot in front of the coyote. It scrambled back into the trees, but she knew it was still nearby, its eyes on her. Sarah dismounted and started looking for whatever the car had left. She led her horse a short way into the trees, careful not to spook him. She needed him close. Otherwise, the coyote might scare him, and he'd bolt back to the stable, leaving her to walk home in the snow. Even though she knew a coyote rarely attacked a human, the thought of that walk made her uneasy. Then she saw the bloody thing against a tree. It took a moment for her brain to register what it was. She quickly tied her horse securely to a tree. The smell of blood would definitely spook him. She hoped the coyote was as cowardly as most of them were. A scared horse was the last thing she needed. Sarah walked towards the tree. A man was tied there. He'd been beaten badly, his head and body a mess of bruises. He was naked, and then she saw the gunshot wound, the dark, wet stain of blood making it hard to see the extent of his injuries. Sarah went back to her horse and got the old blanket. It wouldn't be much, but it was something. She wasn't even sure if he was alive. She laid the blanket on the ground, wrapped him in it as best she could, and then somehow managed to get his limp body onto her horse's saddle. She climbed back on, awkwardly shifting his weight onto her lap. His skin was ice cold, and he wasn't moving at all, so she still couldn't tell if he was alive. Sarah started back towards the cabin. When she got there, she gently pushed the man forward and slid out from under him. She got off the horse and struggled to pull his heavy body off. It was a brutal effort, but finally, she had him inside, dragging him in front of the wood stove. Still no sign of life. Sarah rushed back outside, grabbed her horse's reins, and led him to the stable. The man might need help, but if her horse died in this freezing weather, they'd both be in real trouble. She unsaddled him, gave him feed and water, and then ran back to the cabin. She knelt beside the man, desperately searching for any sign of breath, a flicker of movement. He was still in the same position. Quickly, she unwrapped the blanket so she could check him properly. He was alive but barely. Sarah flew to get her medical bag, then grabbed a bucket of hot water and all the cloths and towels she could carry. She washed the man down, cleaning away the blood and grime. He'd been beaten terribly all over. She noticed several of his toes were crushed, as if someone had taken a hammer to them. The gunshot wound had stopped bleeding for now, so she focused on the numerous cuts and bruises on his head and body first. As much as she dreaded it, she started cleaning around the bullet wound. A careful check told her the bullet hadn't hit any vital organs. She silently prayed it hadn't twisted inside him. She took a pin and pricked his side. He didn't even flinch. Good. She could work without anesthetic. She probed gently for the bullet, digging it out as carefully as she could, which wasn't very gentle at all considering how deep it was. Finally, she stood back and looked at her work. The man had about 30 cuts on his head and body, several broken toes, and a simple break in his leg. She'd put in maybe 50 stitches on his body and 20 on his face. If infection didn't set in, he might just make it. She gave him some antibiotics and checked him over again to make sure she hadn't missed anything. He was a big man in more ways than one. The man's one good eye fluttered open, and he looked at Sarah. "God, I hurt," he whispered. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently. He mumbled, "Clay," and then his eyes closed again. Sarah chuckled softly. "I don't think so, cowboy." She grabbed some old blankets and ripped them into wide strips, loosely wrapping his arms and legs in case frostbite had started. She put a thick layer of Vaseline on his face to hold in moisture and heat. Then she got a 0-degree sleeping bag and laid it on the floor, far enough from the stove so he'd stay warm but not overheat. Exhausted from the ordeal and the tension, Sarah lay down on the couch and was asleep in minutes. Days blurred into a routine of Sarah cleaning him, applying lotion, and changing his dressings. He rarely moved, giving little sign he was even there. She force-fed him soup and tried to get as much water into him as possible. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow, cutting them off from the world. Sarah couldn't get out to call on the other farms, so she cared for the man pretty much around the clock. She found some of her dad's old clothes that she thought might fit him if and when he woke up. Her dad had been about the same size. The ranch was pretty isolated, so visitors were rare, usually just farmers or ranchers bringing animals by. Sarah liked it that way. She'd mostly withdrawn from people since her husband had died. He'd come back from the Gulf War with a sickness the government wouldn't even acknowledge. They'd only been married 6 months before he went. He was fine for a year after he came home. Then the strange illnesses started. Doctors were baffled. In her mind, Sarah told herself he died of the sickness. The truth, she refused to think about it. One morning, before dawn, he'd gotten up, saddled his horse, and ridden out. She'd found him later that morning, curled up on a blanket, a note beside him saying he couldn't take being sick anymore. He'd put a bullet in his brain. Part of Sarah had died that day too. The people who knew her understood. They'd watched out for her for a while. Then life had settled into this quiet solitude, where any human contact was strictly business. Sarah came into the cabin after feeding the livestock, wanting a cup of coffee. As she walked past the sleeping bag, she saw his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Well, cowboy," she said. "I see you're awake." The man didn't answer, just turned his head to look at her. "Would you like some soup?" she asked. Still no answer. "Let's try and get you to sit up in a chair," she said. "It's not good lying on the floor all the time." It took her 10 minutes of careful maneuvering to get him into the plush armchair about 15 feet away. Sarah sat on the sofa. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The man frowned, thinking hard. Said, "I don't know." "How long have I been here?" Sarah looked at him. "About a week ago. You told me your name was Clay." He looked at her, puzzled. "I don't think my name is Clay, but I don't know what it is. Does Clay mean anything to you?" He shook his head very slowly. "What happened to me?" he asked, his voice weak. "I was hoping you could tell me that," she replied. "I think somebody doesn't like you very much. You were shot and beaten almost to death. They tied you to a tree. I guess they thought you were dead, or close enough. I found you just before a coyote did and brought you here. I thought you were dead when I got you in the cabin." "Where is this place?" he asked. "I don't live here, do I?" Sarah chuckled softly. "No, you don't live here. This is my ranch and I live alone." The man leaned his head back in the chair and closed his eyes, losing consciousness again. Sarah went and got her coffee, sitting at the dining table. She thought about this man. He was in deep trouble. Whoever did this either thought he was dead or that he couldn't survive. She'd never heard of anyone being beaten so badly. They'd even taken his clothes to make sure he wouldn't make it. Maybe they hadn't realized the cabin was so close. There was a lot of hate behind what they did. She looked over and saw he'd raised his head again, looking around. Sarah got a can of soup from the cupboard and warmed it just enough to take the chill off. She went to him and spoon-fed him slowly. After about half the soup, he turned his head away. Sarah got her dad's old clothes and dressed him as gently as she could. "Okay, Cowboy, she said, standing up, we're going to start getting you to move a bit. She helped him stand and walked him slowly over to the sofa. Now, in a couple of hours, we're going to walk you back to the chair, she told him. He groaned. It hurts. I know, but it has to be done, she said firmly. This was the start of his slow recovery. Every day, Sarah would make him walk a little further. By the 5th day after he'd woken up, he stopped fighting her and started helping with the walks. Within 2 weeks, he was walking carefully on his own. One morning, about 3 weeks after Sarah had found him, she looked at him and said, well, Cowboy, I think we'd better get you into the bathtub. You're starting to get ripe, and I don't think water will hurt your wounds now. Sarah removed his clothes and his bandages, checking his wounds. They'd healed enough that warm water wouldn't open them. She drew a bath and helped him into the bathroom. She put her arms under his and eased him into the tub. He lowered himself slowly. This feels good, he sighed. Sarah left him with instructions to soak for a while and then wash up. She told him not to try and get out by himself. After about 20 minutes, she went back into the bathroom and helped him out of the tub, dried him off and dressed him. He walked out of the bathroom on his own power. For the next several days, he slept about 12 hours a day. Sarah was at the kitchen table drinking coffee when he walked in from the living room. Is my name Cowboy? He asked. Sarah smiled. No, that's just something to call you since I don't know your name. Sit down and get a cup of coffee. Who are you? The man asked. My name is Sarah Conroy, and I own this ranch. My dad died about a year ago, and I live alone. She still didn't think of the man as a resident, even though she had no idea when or how she could get rid of him. Do you work anywhere? He asked. I'm a veterinarian, and I work the ranch, she answered. That's how I knew to patch you up. I know I'm not supposed to practice on humans, but I didn't have much choice, she added. I also shoe horses. A farrier? He asked, puzzled. Yeah, I shoe horses. Where is this ranch? He asked. Utah, she answered. Those mountains in the distance are the Wasatch Mountains. He looked confused. How did I get here? Sarah brightened. Don't you belong in Utah? He looked like he was about to cry. I don't know where I live, but I know I'm not from Utah. Sarah smiled gently. Great. At least you remember that you don't live in Utah. That's a start. When I look outside, I don't see any buildings, he said. Are there any buildings where you live? She asked. Sure, a lot of them, he said, like she must be stupid not to know that. Sarah smiled. See, you're starting to remember a little. You said that I told you my name was Clay. That feels like a name I should know, he told her. I don't know why I think I should know Clay. Sarah continued her questioning. Could it be your wife, or daughter, or mother? I don't know, he said quietly. Sarah pressed him gently. Think about the night you came here. Do you remember a fight? Anyone beating you? I've been thinking about that, he said. I remember 2 men, but I can't picture their faces or why they did it. Sarah continued questioning him for about half an hour, but he couldn't remember anything new. She decided to leave it for a while. Sarah worked around the ranch for a bit and Cowboy, as she still called him in her head, followed her. She convinced him to start helping with small tasks to get his body moving. He pitched in and she could see he missed working, even though he couldn't remember what his work used to be. When Sarah went inside to make a sandwich, he stayed working in the barn. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. Is there an airport around here? He asked. Sarah thought for a moment. None close other than a few landing strips on ranches. Why do you ask? It just came to me that I know airplanes, and I thought I might be a pilot or something, he said. Sarah asked several questions, but nothing he said really pointed to him being a pilot. Then, a new idea struck her. How about the internet? She asked. Maybe we can look up missing persons. She went to the computer desk in the living room, turned on the computer, and searched the missing person databases. Most were for children, and the few adults didn't match him. She called him Cowboy again as she spent about 2 hours searching every database she could think of. Finally, she shut down the computer. They went back to work in the barn. When they came back into the cabin, they were both so tired they skipped dinner. Cowboy took a shower first and went to bed on the fold-out cot Sarah had set up in the living room. Sarah went to her bedroom, got her nightgown, and drew a bath. As she lowered herself into the hot water, the aches and pains slowly eased. She soaked, letting her thoughts drift to the man and the strange impact he'd had on her life in the past month. Who was he? He was handsome, well-built, and seemed kind enough. She wondered what their relationship would have been like under normal circumstances. She felt sorry for him, knowing he remembered so little and that someone out there likely wanted him dead. Lost in her thoughts, she finished her bath. She hoped Cowboy hadn't heard her when she called out softly, overwhelmed by a sudden rush of confusing emotions. It had been a long time since she'd felt anything like this. Sarah woke up early, pulled on her robe and went downstairs. Cowboy was lying on the cot, the covers thrown off. He'd apparently gotten too hot sleeping near the wood stove. She looked at him, still asleep, her gaze drifting down his body. He was a large man, she thought, a strange awareness stirring within her. She watched him for a moment, then turned and went into the kitchen to start the coffee, trying to push those thoughts away. "Good morning," he said, making Sarah jump. She was almost afraid he'd somehow read her mind. She got up without a word and poured them both coffee. "I've got to go into town this morning to pick up a few things," she said. "I don't think you should come with me, in case one of the people after you is there. Will you be okay here on your own?" He agreed it was best he wasn't seen yet and said he'd be fine alone. He asked her to leave him some chores so he could keep busy. They ate some toast and he went out to the barn. Sarah got dressed and drove into town in her pickup. She went to the bank, moved some money into her checking account, and chatted briefly with the manager. Then she went to the pharmacy and picked up her birth control prescription. The pharmacist always gave her a look. She took the pills more out of habit than anything else. She hadn't been with a man since her husband died. It wasn't that she was against it, but there just wasn't anyone suitable in this small town. She decided to grab a sandwich and coffee at the diner. As she walked in, she saw two of the ranchers who were her clients. They asked her to check on their herds when she had a chance. A farmer also asked her to stop by and look at his pigs. She assured them all she would, ate her sandwich and left. Passing the newspaper box, she put in some coins and bought a paper. Then she went to the supermarket and bought enough groceries to last a few weeks. Sarah loaded the groceries into her pickup and headed home. When she walked into the kitchen, Cowboy was still working in the barn. She put away the groceries and the newspaper on the counter. She made a sandwich and some iced tea and called Cowboy in to eat. As he ate, Sarah sat at the table and started to read the paper. She was almost finished when she saw a picture of a man who looked familiar. She started reading the article and felt a sickening lurch in her gut. She put the paper down and waited until he finished his sandwich. Sarah got up and walked behind him. "John?" she said quietly. He turned around slowly, a grin spreading across his face. "That's my name," he said. "Why couldn't I remember that before?" Suddenly, he looked at her, his brow furrowed. "How do you know my name was John?" Sarah picked up the paper and showed him the article. The headline screamed, "Wealthy developer John Harrison dies in plane crash." The article went on to say that the company plane John Harrison was piloting had taken off over 6 weeks ago and had been found in a remote valley in the Wasatch Mountains. Authorities were baffled as the flight plan was for Denver to Dallas. No body was found. Animals had apparently scattered the bones. But John Harrison's blood was found in the cockpit, confirmed by DNA. Authorities concluded no one could have survived the crash, as the plane had nosedived into the ground. John Harrison's wife, Clara, was set to take over the company, with Tom Evans becoming president. Clara Harrison had announced that John had always wanted her to take the company global. John put the paper down, staring at the wall, his face pale. Sarah broke the silence. "Well, I guess we know who you are now," she said softly. "This opens some doors, but there's still so much I can't remember," he said, his voice troubled. "Do you think I came to this ranch from the plane crash?" "You're not thinking straight," Sarah replied firmly. "How did you tie yourself to that tree, John? Somebody almost beat you to death. Those injuries weren't from a plane crash. That valley is about 40 miles from here. You would never have made it here in your condition." She then told him about the car and how she'd thought someone was dumping trash. She'd never told him why she'd gone to where he was tied. John put his head in his hands. "There's so much here that doesn't make sense." Sarah started questioning him gently. "Think, John. Did you get on that airplane?" I don't think so," he answered slowly. "Should I get in touch with my wife?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "John, you said it yourself. There's too much here that doesn't add up. Let's wait a couple of days and try to get you to remember more." She put her hand on his arm. "Let John Harrison stay dead for a few more days." John looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "The article says I'm wealthy. I don't even have any money to pay you for saving my life." "You don't owe me a thing," she said. "I just remembered something else," he said suddenly. "Tom Evans isn't qualified to be president." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "John, bear with me. I want to make a phone call," she said. Sarah went to the computer and searched online for the company phone number for John Harrison Developers. She came back into the kitchen. "I'm going to call Tom Evans. I hope he's as unqualified as you think he is," she said, a hint of steel in her voice. She dialed the number and walked over, putting her head next to John's so he could hear the conversation too. Within seconds, a receptionist answered. Sarah asked for Tom Evans. "Who shall I say is calling, please?" the receptionist asked. "This is his sister, Sarah," Sarah replied smoothly. A few seconds later, a man's voice came on the line. "Pat? How are you?" Sarah cut him off. "Tom, this isn't Pat. Does sleeping with the boss's wife get you promoted to president? Who is this? Tom Evans yelled into the phone. Sarah continued, her voice low and dangerous. Shut up and listen. I have a few pictures of you and Mrs. Harrison that I think you might like. Oh, and some interesting phone taps too. What do you mean? Tom Evans said quietly, the bluster gone. Sarah suppressed a smile. Unless you want your little scheme to backfire and put you both in jail for life, you'll get $5 million together. Tom was clearly shaken. Look, can't we talk about this? Can I see the pictures? I'll call back with the time and place for the money to be delivered. You'll call back tomorrow. And tell your secretary to accept any phone call from Betty, she said, and then hung up, leaving Tom sputtering on the other end. Sorry I had to do that to you, Sarah said to John. But I figured that's what's going on. John looked shaken. It looks like my wife and Tom Evans tried to have me killed so they could take the company and be together, he said, the realization hitting him hard. Sarah sat back down. John, let's try to remember whatever you can, she urged. What you don't know can get you killed. Why would I be going to Dallas? John asked, his brow furrowed in thought. After a minute, he said, I don't think there was a trip to Dallas that week. Sarah brightened. Then we'll have to prove you never got on that plane and find out who did. She looked at John, seeing another piece of the puzzle click into place for him. What is it, John? I just saw the faces of the two men who beat me up, but I don't know who they are, he said, his voice strained. Try to hold onto those faces, she said. Now, how did your blood get in the cockpit of the plane if you were never in it? John sat and thought for several minutes, memories coming slowly, like pulling teeth. Each new memory brought a fresh wave of questions he couldn't answer. Every bit of his past felt buried deep. Then his face lit up. We had a blood drive a couple of days before you found me tied to the tree, Sarah. Sarah and John questioned each other until midnight, both emotionally drained. Finally, Sarah stood up. I think we need to stop and get some rest. We can continue this tomorrow. John looked down at his hands, a deep sadness in his eyes. I thought my marriage was solid. The sex had slowed down in the past few months, but Clara said she was just tired from trying to prove herself in the company. We'd set up a new division to build new towns, what we called planned urban developments, and Clara was running it. It wasn't going well, and Tom Evans was a major problem. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. Let's call it a day. You need some rest. Sarah took a quick shower, put on her nightgown, and went to bed. She lay there, thinking about the fragmented memories John had managed to pull from the darkness. She agreed with him. There were too many holes. Several times, she heard John downstairs, talking quietly to himself. Finally, she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. After what felt like hours, she went downstairs for a drink. As she passed through the living room, she saw John lying on his back on the cot, arms folded across his chest, staring at the ceiling. Sarah went over and sat down beside him. What's wrong, cowboy? She asked softly. It suddenly struck her how much she liked calling him that. A private name that held a deeper meaning now. John looked defeated. I've just been lying here, remembering more of my past. I've read that's how amnesia works. Yeah, Sarah said gently. Every piece of information you pull out brings 10 more with it. John's face clouded over. A deep despair settled in his eyes. I can't imagine what I did so wrong that my wife would want to kill me, he whispered, the raw pain in his voice tearing at Sarah. He sat up, putting his feet on the floor. Sarah moved forward, kneeling between his legs, and pulled his head to her chest. Don't do this to yourself, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It probably has nothing to do with you. It was probably about the money. He put his arms around her, pulling her close. Sarah let him hold her for a long moment, then gently pulled away. She took his hand and led him to the large braided rug in front of the wood stove. Sarah sat down, pulling him down with her. Their eyes met and then their lips. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened, a silent language of comfort and something more. John's hands found her face, then her hair. Sarah gently pushed him away and stood up. She'd forgotten to put on her robe when she came downstairs. The thin nightgown, though not see-through, clung to her body, revealing the curve of her breasts and hips in the firelight. She pulled the hem over her head and stood for a few seconds, letting John look at her. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled her down to him. He laid her down gently and kissed her again, a soft, tender kiss that soon grew in intensity. Their bodies moved together, a desperate need for closeness and comfort turning into something more urgent. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the silence filled only by the crackling fire. Sarah leaned forward, still joined to him, and kissed him deeply, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. She was terrified of the feelings she had for this man. She knew the way she closed herself off wasn't healthy, but the pain of her husband's suicide still lingered. John had his own dark troubles, and Sarah felt a deep fear for both of them. She rolled over, lying beside him. John reached out and pulled her closer, holding her tightly. "You don't know how long I've wanted to do that," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've watched you, wanted you, even before I was healed enough. I wanted you too," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "I've been afraid to get involved with anyone for so long." Sarah stayed in his arms and told him about her husband, about the quiet despair that had led to that final act, and how she'd retreated from the world. John kissed her gently. "I hope you're not going to stay away from men," he said softly. She kissed him again, pulling away slightly. She reached for him, pulling him close. He held her for several minutes, then kissed her again. "Let's go to bed," she said, taking his hand and leading him upstairs to her bedroom. After they were in bed, John pulled her to him, and they made love again, a deeper, more tender joining this time. As she drifted to sleep later, she looked at him and whispered, "I think we can put that cot back in the closet tomorrow." Sarah woke early to find John gone from the bed. She showered and went downstairs. John was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee already made. He'd showered and dressed. "We have to hurry up and feed the livestock, or they'll be breaking out for food," she said, a teasing note in her voice. John laughed. "The stock has been fed, and the stalls have been cleaned." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's 9:30, young lady. I thought you were going to sleep all day." Sarah put her hands over her face, a blush creeping up her neck. "I haven't slept this late since I was a kid," she mumbled through her fingers. She went over to John and hugged him tightly. "I guess you tired me out," she said with a grin. John tightened his arms around her. "Now I know what it is to have a real woman." Sarah grinned and kissed him. She pulled away slightly, her expression turning more serious. "John," she said, "you know I've lived pretty much as a hermit since my husband died. I think I halfway blamed myself. What about you? Where do you go from here? You're still married, and I'm not looking to get my heart broken again." John stood up, pulling her into his arms again. "I'm pretty sure you know my marriage is over after what she tried to do," he said, looking into her eyes. "I told you last night. I've wanted you since I came out of that fog. I know that I love you, Sarah, and I hope you feel the same way." Sarah leaned into him, her heart aching with a mix of fear and longing. "John," she began softly. "John, sit down and let's talk about you," she said, pulling away slightly and taking his hands. "What can you remember about your past? Are there still parts missing?" John took her hands in his gaze steady. "I've pretty much filled in the blank spaces," he said. "I know almost everything, except the day or days before you found me." Sarah squeezed his hands. "The trauma of those events is probably still too much for your mind to handle. I think it will come to you in the next few days." John continued, recounting the parts of his life he now remembered. "I know I have a development company that's pretty successful. I took it over from my father after he died about 5 years ago. We also do major construction projects in water and wastewater treatment. I set that up as another division, and we have a good reputation in that area. I married my wife about 4 years ago. She was an engineer in the development division. My friends used to joke that she chased me more than the other way around. She was very driven. I always expected her to start her own company one day. I won the award for excellence last year from Engineering News Record, a trade magazine." "Is that a big award?" Sarah asked. "Very big. I was the youngest ever to win it," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "How old are you?" she asked, a playful glint in her eyes. He smiled, a knowing look. "Checking me out for marriage potential?" Sarah blushed slightly. "I'm 37, she said. "I'm 39, he replied. "About your wife?" Sarah prompted gently. "If you're asking if I still love her or want her, no," he said flatly, his voice hard. "The only feeling I have for her is disgust." John squeezed her hands tighter. "Sarah, I would be content to spend the rest of my life right here on this ranch with you in my arms. But I have to find out what happened and why. Will you help me do that?" Sarah couldn't manage a reply. Tears welled in her eyes, and a lump formed in her throat. She simply nodded her head, her heart overflowing. John got up and went to her, pulling her into his arms. He kissed her, holding her close for a long time. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Do you think we have time to get to know each other a little better, now that you've finished most of the chores?" John asked softly, a teasing smile playing on his lips. John took her hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom. They made love again, a slow, tender exploration of their newfound connection. Sarah and John spent most of the afternoon trying to figure out the best way to get the information they needed to bring Clara and Tom to justice. "Is there anyone in Denver you would trust with your life?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed in thought. John hesitated for a moment. "There's Lily. She was my father's private secretary and practically raised me after my mother died. I think my father and she had something going on for a while. She's almost ready to retire, and I always planned to make sure she never wanted for anything." Sarah brightened. "We should get in touch with her first and see if she can help us. Don't you think we should go to the police?" John shook his head firmly. "No, I don't think so. That would give Clara a chance to cover her tracks. She'd probably figure out a way to pin it all on Tom." Sarah and John decided they had to go to Denver and start the investigation there themselves. They knew John had been dumped at Sarah's ranch because it was so isolated. Sarah was sure whoever had left him hadn't realized the cabin and barn were there, especially with the heavy snowfall obscuring everything. Sarah started laying out a plan. She'd rent a small camper van in town, and they'd drive to Denver. She'd rent a motel room in her name. If they needed to contact Clara or Tom, she would be the one to do it. Their first step would be to reach out to Lily, the secretary John trusted. They'd involve the police only when they had enough solid information. Sarah stood up and hugged John tightly. "It's starting to warm up. Spring is just around the corner," she said softly. "Tomorrow's Thursday, and I have some clients to see. I'll go into town, look at campers, and take care of the animals those folks wanted me to check. Friday, we'll drive to Denver and find your friend Lily. We'll have to play it by ear after that, since we don't really know what happened in the days before I found you." Sarah and John made dinner together, talking quietly. John did the dishes while Sarah fed the livestock and packed her medical bag for her rounds the next day. She called a rancher who owned the land next to hers and arranged for his son to look after her animals for a week. When John finished the dishes, Sarah went to him, and he wrapped his arms around her. He kissed her gently and told her he loved her. Sarah rested her head on his chest. "John, I was so broken when my husband died. I pushed everyone away until you came into my life," she said quietly. "Please give me time to sort out my feelings. What we're going to do is dangerous, and I don't know what I would do if anything happened to you, or if you changed your mind about me," she added, her voice barely a whisper. "I just can't be hurt like that again." She rose up and kissed him softly. "Let's go to bed." Sarah didn't bother with her nightgown, slipping into bed beside him, feeling a sense of comfort and peace she hadn't felt in a long time. John slid in next to her, pulling her gently into his arms. He kissed her, and she responded with a quiet affection. He kissed her neck and shoulders, enjoying the simple closeness. She smiled and pressed closer, feeling the warmth of his embrace. They talked softly, sharing thoughts and dreams, finding a quiet solace in each other's company before finally falling asleep in each other's arms. In the middle of the night, John woke and gently hugged her. In her sleep, Sarah murmured, "I love you." John's heart swelled. They stayed wrapped together until morning. Thanks for listening. This story isn't over yet, and things are about to get even more intense. Stay tuned for the next part to see what happens next.